Okay, so welcome to network security. And the last time we have finished basically the discussions about, let's say, network access, securing networks. We covered in this lecture all the issues about, at least we introduced in the topics of firewalls, intrusion detection systems. We looked into some malware aspects of how malicious devices can try to bring down systems, how to attack the availability. So let me just browse through that. Yes, the firewalls, we had the intrusion detection systems, we had discussed the issue of virtual private networks that utilize some kind of virtualized network interface that tunnels all the available traffic from network A to network B through packing these individual packets, IP version 4 packets, into another kind of protocol. It can be DNS, it can be another kind of secure package. So for a tunnel, it's not really relevant what you put it in. So it can be, as we discussed, it can be DNS. So it's just how you put the data in a new kind of protocol. There are various protocols that support any kind of payload, such as DNS, your queries and the responses, but there are also specialized virtual private network protocols that we will have a look at later, such as what OpenVPN uses, IPsec or TLS. And what they do is they basically first establish, so that the main goal is always to create this kind of tunnel. And what we had is that what you need to negotiate on both sides is which security properties are supported. So what kind of encryption is supported, what kind of, let's say, certificates are available to authenticate the parties, what kind of keys and what kind of encryption systems are supported. And then once they agree on an encryption system, they derive their keys and then they use it for encrypted communication, so to have confidentiality and as well integrity in the communication. So this is quite useful. And then we looked at options for denial of service attacks. So basically how attackers can try to overload and consume all the resources at the server side. So basically, one goal is to have a high amplification factor. That means small effort for the attacker, high effort for the defender, and it should not be really distinguishable from any regular traffic and goodwill traffic, so that you cannot filter it out easily. And then we looked at basically the options. How can you increase the amplification factor, this asymmetric resource consumption? One approach is if there are protocols which allow you to send small packets, which reserve larger resources at the consumer side, at the server side. For example, with the SYN flood, where you create or try to establish a new connection, but actually you are not really interested in. What you are more interested in is to try to. So let's move it over here. What you're more interested in is to send various new SYN, so TCP establishment packets that reserve on the server side new resources. So you need to store the state of which new connections you have. And although the servers react, the attacker won't continue to establish the TCP connection. So it's just happy that it was able to reserve some resource at the server side. One of the countermeasures we saw were SYN cookies, where basically all information is put in some kind of, is put in the sequence number. So this is the only information we have that we are able to utilize and to select freely in this communication. So we can put in some information. Especially we can verify and sign in our own understandable way that this message has already been seen by us, and basically we send over this cryptographic hash. And the next time, so this is basically we send over we select a specific sequence number from the server side, and the next time the connection is confirmed in the three-way handshake of TCP, then we can basically check the sequence number that is acknowledged to us. So this is what we sent, +1. Actually, it's sequence number +1. So we can derive the sequence number. We can verify, did we create this sequence number with this specific information, such as the IP address, import, and so on. And if yes, then we can basically ignore and don't have to create some state at this first step, but we create a state at the second step and really the connection is established. So it's a little bit more convenient, and we are not overburdened with the task at the server side to reserve resources for that. Okay, then we looked also at amplification effects in terms of DNS. So a DNS query is typically the resolution of a specific domain to a corresponding IP address. And as you see, the request is quite small. Typically, it just contains the domain name, and typically the response is quite large, especially if it depends. There are lots of information in it that you retrieve. And this larger packet symbolizes the asymmetry in the resource consumption. So the attacker has a small packet to send, the recipient gets a large response. So basically, in the DNS server, if you faked the IP address, you spoofed the IP address that the message was sent from, the recipient receives a large packet, and the more, let's say you invest 1 gigabit per second, then you will receive here maybe 8 gigabits per second if the amplification factor is 8. So it depends on how large this response is in contrast to the request. So this is also a viable approach. But countermeasures are also possible. So to not allow, to require TCP for DNS responses, especially because then you have to have that handshake up front. You have to establish the connection, and then you make sure that only the appropriate sender receives also the response and not somebody else. And also, you should not allow 1 gigabit per second DNS requests from one party. That's not any reasonable use of the protocol. Okay. Yes, then we are somewhere here. So basic defenses, what you can do in order to not get overwhelmed is to either reduce the resources that you invest in a communication. So ideally, the requester should invest more resources. So if the request is larger than the response, then it would be more reasonable for the attacker to just simply send the request to the attacker, or to use that bandwidth to address the victim. So you need to increase the resources on the sender side, on the attacker side, or reduce your own resources. Obviously, if you offer the service only to a closed user group, then you can handpick them. You can make sure that they comply to the policies, the regulations. Either reduce your resources or increase the resource of the potential attacker. And sometimes this is not easily possible. So, for example, with the DNS query, what you have is that the query is smaller and the response is larger. So you need to introduce some kind of artificial costs, and there are some proposals how this can be done. And this is so-called proof of work. So before anybody can ask you for a service, you expect the proof that the service user has consumed, that the resources from the consumer side has already been invested, so that they pay more than you do. This can be done either by computing something at the client side, at the potential attacker side, or give them some task which is just computationally intensive. So it maybe not time, but it still requires effort and energy to resolve it. something that cannot be parallelized, so that you cannot use potentially the power of bots or so that you just introduce some kind of mathematical problem that is that's difficult to compute, but easy to verify. So for you, if you get that proof, then it should be easy to verify that it's correct. So for example, calculation of square roots or hash collisions. Let's say if you have a hash. So a hash is always mapping to a fixed size of bits. Typically it's 160 or 265 or 512 or so, but it can be, let's say, also I don't know, a smaller set, where potentially if you test a large number of potential inputs, so let's say you have the hash function that you require to perform for the hashing, by testing out lots of x, you could find collisions. And let's say you send a message from the attacker side, potential, and somehow you have to provide not just this message, but also, let's say, x2, where both the hash of the message, so x2 equals f of message. So it's easy to compute the hash of the message. For you, it's also easy to compute the hash of x2, but finding x2 with the same hash as the message is quite computationally, it requires some effort. And with that, you could, for example, let's say 64 bits might be too large, but let's say if it's 40 or 50 or so, then you can balance how much effort needs to be invested to find another message, another small information that is results in the same hash. That could be an example how proof of work could look like. Okay. One example for this is with regards to email. So you also receive lots of spam, probably, because it's very simple to send a spam mail, but it has some it's said that 0.2% or so still react, and they make money off these 0.2% of the people who react to spam mail. So therefore, an attacker would require 500 emails in average to send out before the first one reacts, and there's some benefit of it. So if you would introduce some kind of cost to email, so it was also once proposed to pay 1 cent per email, didn't work out, but you could invest some computational time. So for example, there's the idea of hash cache. That's one example where you introduce some kind of computation result that you came up with that is easy to verify, but also proves that you invested some effort. And the idea is you have a hash function. It is hard to find a collision because the hash functions are built in a way that if you hash a value, it results in a hash. But finding some other hash value, but this one is difficult. So to compute back, sorry, not this one. So if you have the hash of x, so if you have the hash of x, then it is difficult to compute what x is. So this is not possible. And because it's not really easily possible, you can state a query that you want to have some kind of partial collision. So let's say this results in 160 bits. Let's say you don't want exactly 160 bits of overlap, but you would require x2 to be found so that x2 results in a hash where the first x bits, x is also a problematic variable now. Let's say the first 50 bits should overlap. And this is a parameter. So you would say the first 80 bits of the hash of x2 should overlap with the first 80 bits of your initial message. And checking this is very simple. If you have x2 and x1, and you just apply the hash function on both inputs, let's say the first 20 bits should overlap, and therefore it's quite time intensive to create another input that matches these first 20 bits. Why is that? How is it done here? So here it is done because typically in order to find some collision you have to test and create various new inputs, millions of inputs, until you find a matching entry. So it's basically just random. You have to try out lots of random inputs. So that would work. The question is how to transfer this x, and basically what they say. It is required that by adding this additional header line, so this specific header modifies the initial message. So if you take that message out, and with that message, if you hash this one, you get the first 20 bits as x's, as zeros. So you basically set the results to compare to zero. So the hash should result in something that starts with 20 first zeros. And if the header line is not present, that means you didn't invest the work. Or if it does not result, then obviously the result is wrong, and the email is classified as spam. So basically you can ask the sender to prove to you that the time has been invested in this effort. So that the sender, the one asking resources from you, has invested more effort than you do. That's also a good approach for if you supervise or manage people. It's always better if the persons write longer emails than you do. Then that shows that they are more involved in the topic. Okay, so basically I think this was just the last slide that we missed the last time. So we looked at this network architecture, basically how to set up networks and using firewalls and intrusion detection systems. So firewalls are eventually just filters might have some state, and you place them at different positions where you would like to block specific kind of traffic from entering that internal network, in the assumption that the external network is always malicious. There are lots of attackers on their way and sending out any kind of messages, so you want to block that. And the second element, intrusion detection systems like Snort, where they actually function like virus scanners, where they look deep into the traffic, into the payload, and try to identify malicious signatures, malicious kind of characters and bits and snippets that are known to be associated to, let's say, malware communication. Then we looked very briefly into tunnels and VPNs, just from the architecture side, that you can connect two sites by tunneling with the security goals of authentication. So you can verify who's on both sides. Sometimes it's just on one side that is authenticated, but these VPNs, they basically also introduce a key set that is used for the communication to be encrypted and signed, so that the integrity is also provided. And we'll look briefly into denial of service attacks, just from the perspective that if you in future set up a service that offers resources to customers, and it uses resources to provide the services to the customers, it should be looked into first, monitoring how the resource consumption is progressing, whether there's some misusage, and if there's some misuses, to introduce some kind of costs to the user side. Okay, so now start with a different topic. we will switch. Basically, we have now steganography as next, and then we will look into a little bit more malware, and then all the details of security protocols we will look into, but not today. So today we are looking into network steganography because it's also related to networks. But before we dive into more attacks and more into countermeasures and protocols, especially, this is also something that is often overlooked, but is also relevant in as typically attacks relate to retrieving information from the networks. So it's not just there are attacks attacking the availability where you want to crash some services, where you want to hinder so basically not you, but obviously the attackers want to stop some services from functioning. But there are also attacks on the confidentiality of data and data from within the network that should not leave the network. And with network steganography, attackers can typically still smuggle out and steal data from the network and transfer it somewhere without being noticed. So what is steganography? That's from Greek, covered writing. So basically hidden writing. It's very old, dates back to 2,500 years or so, and it's the practice of undetectably communicating a message in a cover message object. So you need some kind of regularly looking communication, a cover object. Could be a picture, could be regular communication, and you want to hide the message in that. And there's some historical references to this. So there has been around 2,500 years ago, there was a Greek tyrant Hysterius, and he wanted to communicate with his son-in-law that they should attack a common enemy at a specific time. But basically, that communication should not have been captured. So, or even if you sent, they had slaves at the time. Even if the slave would have been captured, the slave should not know the information, and they should also not be able to torture it out of him or so. It should also not be any kind of medium that is transferred should not be easily stolen. So basically what he did is that's a picture, depicting historically, it's a painting, how the back of the head of the slave was tattooed with the message, and then 2 or 3 months were passed. They let the time pass so that the hair could regrow, and then the messenger was sent out. The messenger itself himself didn't know the information. He didn't know what he has on his head. So they couldn't also torture him. Basically, he was sent out and was received by the other king, and the hair was cut down again, and the message could be read. Here are some other examples that I found quite funny. I will always love you is written here in Morse code. So all these dots are basically part of a Morse code, and you can also put it in a scarf. Obviously, there are also some kind of images that we will look into, but also microdots. So for example, here's a photo of some kind of communication, and the information is not in the blackened part, but in these dots to the left, right, and at the top where the dots are placed. This is also resembling some kind of information that can be used to recreate the original message. Then there was also a very interesting quiz show in Who's to Be Millionaire. You might know that. Where basically the frequency of cuffs during the quiz show was relating to the right answer. It just was not so popular because that happened on 11th of September 2001, I think. So, and at that time there was also something else going on, but basically it was somebody in the audience coughing at the right time and the right frequency. So I mean, how often he coughed. Patterns of cuff, exactly. That was quite interesting. There were 19 cuffs, and I don't know. I mean, it didn't really catch up too much in the tech in the media because it was 9th of 11, 9th, no? 9/11. The same day something else happened. Okay, so let's see what kind of patterns we have in putting information in hiding information. And typically, you have let's separate the communication field. So the whole domain of information hiding is separated in basically permanent data storage, such as images or music, or in communication, such as cuffing and sending messages, talking, and especially IP communication, so communication over the internet. So it's very, there you might have known several examples. You can put information in digital media, images and audio, but you can also put information in file systems, probably also in free areas of disk. So if you are aware of, so there, for example, the tools VeraCrypt, which allows you to, let's say, show it. Do you know? That's, for example, a tool that allows you to, okay, I don't have it, but let's install it. So it allows you to place data in those parts of your hard disk that are not used yet. So typically, that takes some time. Is it? No, is it? Still faster than expected. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's installing, but still I want to finish. No. So where can we place hidden files? So what you can obviously do, you can create a file. I cannot zoom in. So I can create a volume, and I can either an encrypted file container, so this is a single file that uses the input of your password, and there's some mouse movement also used to create some key, and the key is encrypted with your password that you can only enter with your password. You can also encrypt the whole partition, but you can optionally it creates a hidden volume. So I can create now hidden volume that is allowing me to, so first it identifies where my partitions are currently located, up to which point they are filled, and the empty parts that are not yet filled with data, they can be used to create a file, a new data, a new file system, which is an area that can be overwritten by regular data traffic, by data storage and so on. So nobody can basically know in upfront whether there's data or not. So let's create this. We take the normal mode, let's say, and then we select the drive. I don't know, hard disk. Okay, naja, good. It should not be used. That might be too dangerous, I would say. So what it does, maybe I show it in the slides easier. So what it does is, if this is your hard disk, typically you have in the front the information of where files are located, how large they are, and so on. And let's say your files consume all these parts. And with VeraCrypt and other tools, you can create here another hidden file system, which has the same information, so where files are located and so on, but everything is encrypted. So these are to the normal world, and if you look on it on the bits themselves, they're just encrypted. So it just looks like random. And also here they are just random bits, and these bits also look random. But if you have the right password, you can decrypt it, and then you can read this file system. And if you are, I don't know, at the airport and somebody forces you to show you files, then you can say, this is my only files I have, and everything else looks just like random bits as they look on the hard disk anyway. So they cannot verify that you have any kind of hidden data on your machine. And of course, if you fill your hard disk too full, then the data will be erased, but that's up to your consideration. So you can hide files also on file systems in this unused parts or in explicit files themselves. But we are looking at the communication challenges, because there you can also have hidden communication, as with the cuffing. Depending on how often the person has cuffed, maybe that means if you have four potential answers to select from in who becomes millionaire, then you can cuff 1 to 4 times, and depending on that, you might reveal which answer was the correct one. So how can you do it? So first of all, they are out-of-band channels. That means channels that are not meant for communication, but are used also to regularly communicate. And then there's network steganography, where channels are meant for communication, such as sending IP packets, but you integrate some kind of additional message. So what would this be? So for example, let's say in times when calling someone was very expensive, calling 1 time means I'm fine, calling 2 times means please call me back or so. Yeah, so you can, without picking up the phone, you can signal, depending on how often it rings, you can agree on the code, and the number of phone vibrations or the rings transfer the message. Or other kinds of out-of-band channels are, for example, if the machine. So I had a colleague who did his PhD on covered channels, basically hidden channels for communication. And one approach he looked into was whether, for example, on smartphones, an app can measure the gyroscope and the temperature, and depending on how the phone rings or how it vibrates, it can detect whether there's a phone call, and depending on temperature and the energy consumption especially, it could detect which websites were opened, because there are some characteristic patterns. If you open, I don't know, Facebook, then let's say there's first a small pause, then you get some scripts to process, and that takes a specific time, and then there's another pause, and then there's another specific time frame for scripts to process. And let's say Airbnb behaves differently. Maybe it loads the scripts up front and has just one script processing time, but that's much longer. So you can identify some kind of patterns. So just to notice this, it's easy. And also communication was possible the same way. So if one app was not allowed to communicate to another app because it's somehow there's some barrier, some firewall, but they were on the same machine, obviously you can, let's say, create a file somewhere. Do not write anything in it, but by not having the presence of the file, the other service can check. It's not reading it, it's just checking, basically, is it there? And by seeing which files are there and which files are not there, it can communicate very slowly, but it can communicate. Or it can enable the phone to do some calculations, which is measured by the other app. And the specific calculations pattern, when is the energy consumption of the phone high or low, can again signal something. So this is obviously not meant for communication, to let the smartphone compute something, but it can be used as well. But we are looking into network steganography, basically where you have regular communication, sending messages from A to B, that everybody can see, let's say, especially the filtering systems and the guarding systems, and still you want to put some information in. So the model is that you typically have you have some data to embed, you have some cover data type that, I mean, in the typical examples are a cat picture or so. And then you have some hidden message, help, I don't know. And then you have some kind of rule, how you put the information in, and then you transfer it. And at the other side, if you know how the pattern is, then you can extract the data. So for example, I think also, I don't know, in an old thrillers with all this detective movies, sometimes they had this kind of paper sheet with the holes in it, and then put it on the newspaper, and then at the holes there were the letters shining through, and then they could read the hidden message, and depending on how the message was written, they could basically extract the hidden message. And the algorithm or the key was in that case, do you know what I mean? Paper with that holes. Let me just see, detective paper. I don't know if it's really the case. Now, this might be too simple. No, I don't find it here. Newspaper maybe. No, no, not that one. I mean, it's I don't know. So yeah, this one is maybe the one that I mean, where you basically apply. Why can't I open it? March. Yeah. So this is the simplest one when you have some kind of some regular information. That's the newsletter in the background, and then you have a code, and the code here is which letters count, and then you apply it, and then you see the hidden message. So, I mean, this is the very simple model of it, how it is to be used, and it also shows that it doesn't have to be very complex. So it's just a rule set, some kind of algorithm, some kind of key that means maybe what to look for, what to count as information that is transferred. And in this newsletter example, the point was always only to look at specific letters, so the 15th letter, the 20th letter, and so on. So if you know which letters to look for, what numbers, then you just apply it on both sides, and then you can basically retrieve the data. I mean, yeah. And just to say why the example is not so perfect, because actually what we want to apply it in any kind of cover data. So that means innocently looking data that should be just regular communication that's not causing any kind of suspicion. But we modify it a little bit, and then we by knowing where to modify and what to look for, we can retrieve the data. One typical example also, let's say, yeah, I want to give you another from the picture for pictures for media. And what has, for example, been done is one moment. There's also a nice picture. Yeah, this one maybe. This one. No, maybe not this one, but this one. So what we have here is, you see this picture, and it has colors. And if you think of these as pixels, every pixel has a distinct color. And typically a color is red, green, blue. and each of those have 8 bits. Yeah, red, green, blue. That's RGB, 8 bits each, from 0 to 255. And let's say you would modify the last bit. So whether you change it from, I don't know, the red part from 172 to 171, does it really make a difference? Is it really noticeable to the eye? And it's actually not. So for images, one common approach is to embed the data in the pixels, and basically you have all the pixels. I don't know, 1024 times 1024, or here 5000 times 3750, and that means we have quite a large number, 50 million pixels in this image, and every pixel has 3 values of 8 bits. And if you just modify the least significant bit, then we have 15 million, so 15 megabytes, megabit times 3, 45 megabit that we could embed in this picture just by modifying the last bits of red, green, and blue in every pixel. And basically, what we could embed is any kind of information. You modify the original data; it still looks like a cat picture, but the colors are a little bit very tiny off, so that you don't really see the difference. That's one example how the embedding could also be in media. But in communication, we have other options, and sometimes a picture is very large. There you have lots of opportunity to modify bits. But let's say if you have a very small message, DNS request or so, what can you put in? So that's the question. And the idea is that the sender and the recipient, they know both the rule. I mean, how the key, the application, the algorithm, where they should look and where to put inside information. But there's also warden, and any message is, let's say, publicly visible. And this warden can be some kind of intrusion detection system that really looks for patterns that are irregular, that especially, let's say, it also knows the secrets. That means, let's say, the information. Let's say Alice wants to extract the information that she has available. Maybe Alice is working at a company, and Alice wants to extract this hidden company information to the outside world, to Bob, wants to sell the information, and the warden checks that no employee smuggles out some data. So they also know what information to look for, but they don't really know where to look for. But everything should be visible and public. And the question is, how can Alice basically embed the information that she wants to transfer to Bob without the warden to notice? And that's the same basically that we also had in the ancient history. I mean, there we had the slave carriers that were transferring data, and each of these slaves and each of these carriers could be observed, could be interrogated, but they should not be able to reveal any kind of secret. But the sender and the recipient, by knowing where they put the information in, can both put the information correctly in and retrieve it at the other side, although every communication in the middle is observed. So, why is this relevant? I mean, why is this an issue, and why is it a topic that we should discuss? First of all, because lots of information is retrieved by persons. I mean, an attacker would typically spearfish. That means try to convince somebody from within the company to become, let's say, malicious and smuggle data out, and then they need some kind of method how to extract the data without it being obvious. I mean, what you cannot do is in typical companies, you plug in a USB disk and you copy everything and then you go home. That's not possible because USB drives are disabled by your default policy in Windows, let's say. So you could take pictures, then they forbid to have smartphones and take pictures. So you just are bound to your local machine, that is basically controlled by the administration, and you still want to get some data out, and they apply then steganography to they might be allowed to communicate to the internet, but that communication is overlooked and it's really controlled, and they still try to get the data out somehow. Obviously, also Secret Service, military, espionage, stealthy communication, data exfiltration is an issue. In some countries, also censorship convention. So, if in some countries will be forbidden to get information on specific topics or political issues or external media, then you could try to get this information through these means, through steganography, and you want to have some deniable concealed storage. What I told with VeraCrypt, if you have your hard disk and you have here your data, and somewhere at the back where all the random bits are, you have also random looking bits, then you can just deny that you have those, because they cannot prove that there's really something there. Yeah, journalists the same, freedom of speech. But it's also used for malware, especially let's say you have lots of malicious devices somewhere in the network, and the attackers want to avoid that it is noticed that they are communicating with bots, and are basically commanding these bots to attack a specific victim, for example, to start a denial of service attack. So also the malware producers want to have this stealthy communication steganography so that they can communicate with their controlled bots without notice. Here's an overview from a publication that I put together, and it's not mine, but I mean, this is just showing where steganography has been observed. For example, when visiting some websites, the least significant bits in favicons, that means if you visit a website, typically at the top left of your browser, just see, do we have here something? I visit any web page. Let me just see, do we have here something? Anything? Any website opening? No, obviously, no, it's not working. Ah, yeah. So you see this tiny little icon up there, maybe not from their side, but at the top left you have this little, I don't know, 64 times 64 bits pixels for tiny icon for website. This is also transferred to the recipient of the web of the reader, and there you can put some information in. For example, hiding URL to download a configuration file. So in this little icon to the website might be just regular, but the little icon might contain an URL to some malicious configuration file. Or, yeah, data at the end of a JPEG file, least significant bit in bitmaps and PNG files. Again, this least significant bit of red, green, and blue. It's not visible to the eye, but contains information. Again, in images. But let's say, what is this? Yeah, there's also a comment tag in the HTTP 404 error message page. So, for example, if you visit the website and your website's not available, you get this error message. But maybe you don't just get the error message, but you get also some further hidden command and control commands for the controlled bot, malware bot, that tells maybe which victim to attack. Images are quite popular, but we are looking now in more communication related issues. Here is the summary. So basically, so what is communication used for? Data exfiltration, hiding confidential data, and controls to malicious bots. Okay. So, yeah. So when we are talking about network steganography, the question is, where can we embed the hidden message? That's the big question. Where can we embed it? And looking at the Layering, I mean, we have the physical layer for one-to-one communication. We have medium access and data links, that's also one hop. Basically, we want to utilize something here in between here, because let's say A is here and B is there, and they want to communicate hidden information from to each other. So this might be too short, but something that we can use for routing on the transport layer or in the application layer protocols. This is something that we can take influence on. And if we look at the regular, how the data is composed, so first we have the original data at the application layer, then we get from the layer 4, the transport layer, the header, layer 3. So let's zoom in. Layer 3 adds some header, layer 2 adds some header and some trailer, so we have to check some at the end. And at the end, we send the messages and they look like this. So maybe we send message 1, maybe we send message 2, it got lost. Then we send message 2 again. Then we send message 3 and 4. After a while, message 5. Maybe we misread some timeout. Message 5 sent again. Message 7 maybe arrived earlier than message 6. So the question is, do you see any point where you could introduce some kind of information? Where could you hide some information? Always assuming that every step was what was determined and voluntarily done. So there's no by chance or randomness. Every step in this communication pattern was planned. Where could you put in some information? Because this is something novel that we have in communication and as a network steganography, is that we don't have just one image, one cat picture where what we can analyze, but we have a stream of messages. And the stream of messages have some patterns that we can utilize. So do you see anything that looks chaotic, that doesn't look ordered, that, I mean, if you have a exact, precise set of traffic, that's difficult to put information in. But if there's some chaos, if there's some kind of irregularities, that could mean something. So for example, I mean, yeah, messages get lost, that's right. Messages get lost, that's right. But let's say if they are not really lost, but have been not sent, that might be some information. Or if there's a resend as with message number 5, although it has not been necessary, that might be also some information. Or that there's a gap between 4 and 5, it might be also a message. Or if the messages are larger, like 6 and 7 are larger than the ones before, might also be a message. Or if the order has changed, it might also be a message. And just always assume that you just don't have these 7 packets, but let's say you have 1,000 of packets that are sent, and every kind of modification and change might be recorded, and then you can try to identify, to put in some meaning into it. So let's have a look at what options we have at network steganography. So there are more than 100 techniques known, and we will look at some kind of generalization. Sometimes it's in the metadata that we look into. I mean, what I want to say here is there are lots of, I mean, what we want to do now is to take all these 100, let's say, examples and to create some kind of pattern out of it. So what kind of generic patterns exist? Because looking at 100 individual cases might be too overwhelming. They use different terminology, they reinvent common basics. So basically what we come up to is to go through this kind of list of steganography hiding patterns, what they are. And basically the idea is, if you want to transfer some kind of information and you have given a specific network protocol, then there's a few set of patterns that you can apply that gives you the direct solution. So basically it's a generalization of the various approaches. So, and we can have various kind of networks where this is applied. It can be local and network-wide covered channels. It can be noisy and noise-free covered channels. And we can have issues with timing and storage. We will look into this. And we have also semi-active or semi-passive covered channels. Basically, the question is whether the sender himself is participating in the steganography or not. So for example, if the sender is having some add-on to his software which introduces the stealthy data, and the recipient as well, then they are both active because they are both actively assuming and participating in the steganography. But you can also have basically an unknown sender that's just regularly communicating with somebody who's also not aware of being part of the steganography covered channel, but there's some kind of additional module that modifies the input of the sender and retrieves the data before passing it to the destination. So this you can have, for example, if you have IP, it's passing the messages onto TCP, it's passing the messages onto some kind of steganography, and that passes it on to the browser. And on the other side, the same might be at the web server. So the web server and the browser, they are not aware that they are participating in this data modification and reading data out, but they provide the regular, the innocent looking data flow that the steganography is basically attaching to. So it always needs some kind of innocent looking data to embed the data, the malicious or the hidden data into. So depending on whether they are actively participating or just passively, because there's some other module, can have these various combinations. So it all happens in reality as well. Okay, let's have a quick overview on the categorization, and then we will go one-to-one into it. That looks already quite good. So, okay, so what we are looking into network covered channels, and one large element is of the solutions about timing. Just use the time in the communication, because the communication is typically a flow of messages. Let's say you have 100 messages to your availability, and depending on when you send it, you can put information into it. And if you're protocol agnostic, you don't even have to know which protocol that is. You just know, okay, there are 100 messages, and now I want to embed some information. So for example, it's written here, inter-packet times. This is how much gap you leave between the packets. Let's say you can choose between 5 milliseconds and 10 milliseconds that you send a message out. And 5 milliseconds means 0 and 10 milliseconds means 1. And let's say if you introduce also other kind of elements, I don't know if you have the ability to send very precisely after 1 millisecond, 3, 5, 7 milliseconds, then you have already 4 different times that can represent 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. So the inter-packet times, that's the time between the packets. Then you have the message timing. So let's say if the recipient expects at specific times a message, and either you send it or not, that also might reveal an information. Without having to know which protocol it is, or how quickly you send the messages. So let's say you have two different bandwidths, I don't know, 500 megabit per second or 300 megabit per second, and varying between those bandwidths would also be an option to signal some information, which anyone looking at the data, every data looks, so the data has not been changed. The packets still are the same. They are just arriving at different times. And we can do a little bit more if we become protocol aware. So let's say, if we know that TCP, let's say, is used, then we can drop some packets, artificial loss, and signal with this against something, because we artificially and voluntarily drop it, because we know TCP will still recover it, but the drop will be also noticed. Or message ordering. So TCP also can correct the wrong order, but this could be also some information where we can put some message in. Or there's a retransmission. So typically if there's a loss, there's a retransmission of the packet, but you can also retransmit just out of the blue, because that should encode some information. Frame collisions is more about wireless communication, where you observe that there's somebody else sending, and then you so willingly create a collision, although you should not have sent any message in that time frame. You still do. Others will notice the collision and will learn from it. And temperature, that's basically, we will have a look at this. That means how much load you put on some other party. So this is all about timing, basically retransmit, loss. So you don't change anything in the protocol. The same data is transmitted. You did not take influence on any of it. The 100 packets are still arriving at the destination, unmodified. And there we have the next large area, where it's about storage, where it's now not timing, but we really modify something in the packet. And then the question is, what do we modify? So for example, what you can do is to modify the not payload. So you could modify the structure by selecting different packet sizes. So size modulation, selecting smaller or larger packets. Or the sequence, meaning if you have in your headers, we'll all go a little bit more in detail on this. If you have in your headers, for example, in an HTTP request, sometimes you also list what browser you have, what screen resolution you have, what media you support. And these are these elements. And there's a difference whether you say, this is my resolution and this is my browser that I use, or whether you say, this is my browser that I use and this is my resolution. So you can change the order. It's still the same information, but the order is different. Or if you leave some of these elements out, or if you add them twice. So you can also say, this is my browser, this is my resolution, and this is my resolution, and this is my resolution. They are all at the end. It's the same information 3 times. The protocol will still comply and everything will work, but you can add some information in it. And the last step is when you keep the structure, but you modify values. For example, if you can select some random value somewhere that you can put information in, or yeah, these will be interesting. Again, HTTP, you say, this is my resolution. And that has some kind of protocol description, HTTP, how you specify this is your resolution. But it doesn't specify whether you write it with big or small letters, or whether you alternate in the word itself. So we'll look into this. And there's, basically this is the data, metadata, and then there's the payload itself. We'll look in some of these examples. So let's start with the protocol agnostic time patterns. So step number 1, let's modify the inter-packet times. So if you leave, examples are, let's say, 1 millisecond and 5 milliseconds that you have between the packets. If you have a short inter-packet time, that's a 0. If you have a large inter-packet time, that's a 1. let's say if you have 4 interpacket times that you can select for, that can be 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. So, and to the warden observing this traffic, it can be random, it can be by chance, it can be, I mean, it doesn't have to be really communication. It's not really obviously detectable as communication. Okay. What you can also have is message sequence timing. So for example, if you know that there are some acknowledgements, so in TCP, what you have is typically you have to acknowledge every packet. You have two options. Either you acknowledge directly, so packet 1 is acknowledged directly. That's not right. So either you acknowledge directly, or you wait for 2 packets and you acknowledge the last one. Both are valid. I mean, you can in TCP do both. And not just TCP, but also other layers. And by answering directly, that might be a 0, and answering with a small delay and acknowledging 2 packets at the same time, that can be another bit. Or with the throughput pattern. So if you have 2 throughputs, I don't know, this is maybe 500 mbit per second and this is 300 mbit per second. If you alter between these values with your data stream, then you can also signal some information with this. And obviously, one single message is not sufficient, so you have here several messages sent in this speed, and then you have several messages sent in that speed. And obviously, the content of the messages that you send are totally ignored. It doesn't matter, it just depends on how quickly you send them. Okay. So this is so far with the timing patterns and not taking protocols into account. If you take protocols into account, if you are protocol aware, again, if you know that there's either in a TCP packets are resent or an Ethernet and Wi-Fi packets are resent, you just can simply select packets which you voluntarily and by will modify either that they are lost, I mean that you don't send them, and basically then you have them numbered 1, 3, 4, and then the recipient learns that 2 is missing. That might be some information. Obviously, 2 is then sent later because you know that the protocol will recover the information, but it already signals to the recipient some information. Here's an example how this passive covert channel can be used. So if somebody is involved in this communication, and let's say A sends the messages 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's some man in the middle, and man in the middle drops 2. The other man in the middle receives 1, 3, 4, learns that 2 has been dropped, and passes it on to B. A and B will recover message number 2. But basically, this man in the middle, this passive communication partners, are able to communicate through the data stream of somebody else without being visible to them. So that means, again, let's say you are an employee, you want to retrieve data, extract data from the company. You have a very highly secured web browser, I don't know, but you configure a proxy to it, which should check that you don't pass any information out of it. And the data is sent somewhere, and basically the proxy can decide to drop the message number 2, and at the other side there's some other, I don't know, a service that might be not passive, which checks which data has been missing and learned for, and basically they need to agree up front what it means that 2 is missing, but they can use this communication pattern. Another element where you can use the power of TCP, that it reorders the messages so that they arrive correctly. So if the sender voluntarily and willingly exchanges some of the packets, TCP is recovering that. And basically what you can do is so especially if only two packets are exchanged, then you can always consider two packets as basically this is one bit, this is one bit, this is one bit, and you can try, if you make an exchange, then the bit would be 1. If you don't make the change, then the bit is 0. So depending on whether you switch or not two packets in a row, then it reflects whether there's a bit set or not. I mean the same patterns. If you have again protocols that detect duplicates, such as in Wi-Fi or so, or in or DNS request or TCP or so, and then you can add voluntarily duplicates in the traffic that will be ignored at this site. So it does not really take influence on the protocol, but can contain information. Coming to a little bit more complex elements. So this frame collisions, this is more on Wi-Fi. So let's say we have the communication partners A, B, C. So this is A, wants to communicate with B. And there's also some communication going on between C and D. And let's say this is packed in some time frames where C communicates to D. And by carrier sense medium access, everybody, by listening into the medium, can detect whether there's communication ongoing. And let's say Alice wants to communicate 01100, then it just listens into the medium, and every time she wants to transfer a bit, she scrambles, so she also sends something, so that the communication of the other person is interrupted. And by the interruptions, B also can listen to the medium, and then B notices, okay, here has been no collision, here has been a collision, here has been no collision, no collision. And so A and B don't really exchange messages with each other, they just interfere with the communication of others, and then they can retrieve from that which bits have been sent. Okay. And temperature, that's also indirect. So A wants to communicate with B, and there's a server's third-party node C, and basically they are already in interaction with each other. So I don't know, that could be I don't know, web server or so. And B wants to learn what A has to say, and let's say if A wants to signal a 1, then it causes lots of load on C. If it wants to signal a 0, it doesn't cause load on C. Again, 1, lots of load. And B is constantly interacting with C and notices whether C is under pressure. I don't know, based on some clock skew or so. I mean, the clock is diverging under load higher than normally, or there are some other observations that lead to the conclusion that C is currently under pressure. Probably if B sends a message, how long the reply from C takes. If C is more under pressure, then the reply might take longer. And A just interacts with C and puts C under pressure, and B can notice it, that C is under pressure. The state of C's pressure is basically the signal that is interpreted. Okay. What do we else have? That's going too much into detail. At one point, artificial reconnections, especially in Wi-Fi or MQTT broker, where you have to register at a service. You can basically terminate and re-establish your connection. That can be also an access point, terminate and re-establish. And somebody else monitors this and basically sees that you are left the network, you sent a de-authentication message to the Wi-Fi, and then you joined in again, and through that participating in a network, yes or no, and leaving the network, joining the network, that can be also a signal. Okay. Okay, last point. You can also reset some kind of TCP connection, but also in other protocols. It really depends. I mean, you can basically ask the protocol to be reset to new parameters, and that can be also observed. But what is the message here? Is basically you have this in the covered timing patterns. You don't change anything in the communication. I mean, meaning the messages stay exactly the same. But what you do is either you modify the interpacket times, message timing rate, or your participation in the network, artificial loss, artificial retransmission, message ordering, and then some more network specific behavior which does not influence communication but is observable to others. Okay, maybe let's have a look at the other elements what you can change, and at the end I have a small video showing how it looks like. So let's start with the structure modifications. Again, we don't modify the payload that is sent, just the headers. That direction we will go. And the simplest modification of how we modify the structure is by changing the size. Let's say you have two size differences. You have size 1 and size 2. And that can be associated to bits. You have 4 different sizes that can be also associated with bits, obviously. And any warden looking at this, it's basically like you are sitting in your cell in a prison and you're writing a short letter and a long letter, long letter, long letter, short letter, and by the size of the letters you communicate and not by the content of the letter. This is also one very nice thing to use, the sequence pattern. So is it at the right place to see? Because the sequence pattern. Ah yes, the sequence pattern. Yeah, so we are modifying the header basically. Let's say we have a header information of DHCP or FTP, HTTP, and so on. And this might be some element how the header looks like. So HTTP asks for the index file for which host and this user agent, so which browser and which language are accepted. Yeah, this is the header fields, basically, the optional header fields. And you can change the order. And depending on which order you have, that can be associated with 1 or 0, or depending on how many options you have and how many potential orders you have, that can also be more bits that you encode. That's basically the position pattern, where they are, and also element option, number of element patterns. So if you, for example, don't tell your browser and you leave it out, that can be also some signal. So let's say you agree with your communication partner on a code of their 10 potential header information. Yes, let's quickly have a look. Wireshark. Let's quickly have a look how this looks like. Yeah, not now. And then we open a website. That's not encrypted. Great. Then we look for HTTP traffic. Great. And then we have a look at what information has been sent. Yeah, so user agent. I accept this kind of medium, HTML, HTML, XML, image, WebP, language accepted, encoding, connection, upgrade, insecure requests. Okay, so this is basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, 6. And they are much more specified for HTTP, so you could select more. And if you would change the order of these, let's say with 6 elements, we have already 6 facultate potential orders, and they also could reflect all individual bits that we want to communicate. Where is it? Yeah. And if we leave them out, then we can add a little bit more, so we can put really lots of information in the order of these headers. We can also add a redundancy, basically by adding additional fields, extending value of the fields. I mean, this can be also done in IP4 version 6. There are also additional headers, but in HTTP it's quite simple to visualize. If we replicate this entry twice or 3 times, then we basically can also add information into that. Let me just have a quick look, because time is running out almost. Yeah. So let's have a look. What can we change in the values themselves? So now we just modified the order. Let's say that's also protocol invariant, and let's say in HTTP, it's the same request if we order modify the values. If you modify the order, but now we change also values, and let's see what we can get there. So some protocols have the option to select a random value. For example, the identifier field in IP version 6, version 4, it's up to the sender to decide, or the initial sequence number in TCP, or also some fields in DHCP. These are values selected by the sender. And this can also, of course, contain some information. Let's again pick where's Wireshark, where's my IP protocol. We go here to IP, and then we have the identification. Where do we have it? Yeah, it's actually this 7103. This is characterizing the IP packet, and the next IP packet that we send should be different. 7105. Yes, that's different. I mean, there in this is selected by the sender, and in TCP, let's have a look at the handshake. I mean, maybe you don't look at the handshake, but basically the sequence number that we take is also selected by the sender, by us in this case. So we just simply encode some information in that as well. Okay, what you can also do is there are some unused or reserved fields in some headers, especially IP version 4. So that don't, let me just see, reserved flag. There might be some that we can use. There's some padding sometimes. If you have to have a fixed number of bits that you transfer, then the remaining 3 positions are filled with random bits that are typically ignored at the other side. Because typically you have here somewhere written length, and then it tells, okay, the packet just goes until here, but for technical reasons we have to still fill it with bits, and these bits can be selected to transfer some information as well. Obviously we are modifying data in this case, but it is difficult to interpret this as real information. So you have to know that there's information inside. This is also a nice example how you can have the same effect but changing the input. So this again, this header fields in HTTP, there's no rule that they have to be large or small. So you can vary also in the word. So this user agent is equal to this user agent, and every letter, whether you write it large or small, can be a bit containing some information. So this case pattern, very nice. Yeah. timestamps. I mean, you can also modify in some parts the least significant bit. So, for example, you have timestamps or something where you don't have the freedom to select the data by yourself to the fullest. So, like the time, but you can change the least significant bit. That doesn't have big influence, but can also signal some information. So as you see, there are lots of options what we can change. We will not go into this data changing element, but I wanted to show you before that I will pick up later next time. What I want to show you is this covered channel education analysis protocol, because it's exactly for that, so that you can test how this you can play around yourself. It's easy to use. You can download it. It's available. There's a server inside listening on incoming messages, and a client where you can configure to send out messages with specific patterns. You can modify the inter-arrival times, artificial loss, and retransmission. And here's some example that you can test. I mean, I've prepared a video for this. So basically on the right, there's the server. Should have zoomed in. So that's written Python, the start server port to 8000. And on the left are exactly the codes that I wanted to send. So first there's an HTTP request of HTTP 1.1, another of HTTP 1.0. So if we start that, basically the server will notice, yes, there has been a HTTP request with HTTP 1.1 and with 1.0. And you can see the pattern that it changes 1.0, 1.1, 1.0, 1.1. And the next is by modifying the, I think we also modified the user agent in that. So if we enable, yeah, in the code it's also visible that we modify the user agent. Let me just see, can I zoom in? Yes, I can zoom in. So first of all, we see this pattern. Yeah, that's good. Then what we see is that the user agent, the letters are large or small. Yeah, that's also easy to do. And the next that we do is what we do here is we will send a message to the port, to the server 8000, and basically modify the timing. Let's have a look. Oh man, this is so we started the server on the right side. We start now the client on the left side, and there are sent 5 messages. And what you should observe here is the time difference to previous packet. Oh, it's really hard to see. It's 0, 2 seconds, 1 second, 1 second. So we can clearly define a pattern in which messages should arrive. So I also uploaded the video for this, so you can have a look at home. So this is working. So the inter-packet times are working fine. And Wireshark is also, yeah, more realistic set would be to let's say 100 milliseconds, 300 milliseconds. Here that kind of inter-arrival times, 100, 300, 301, 100. And that is then how we can encode the information. And Wireshark confirms it. Yeah. So far for today. Next time we will have a look at countermeasures. It's just one slide, but this we will pick up next time. Maybe you can think about it. What can we do as a countermeasure? Until then, have a nice week. See you in the labs, and see you then next week for the lecture. Bye.